I've given him instructions to clean his garbage up. Isn't it so nice to have him write that song for our little church? I mean, right here in Little Minnesota, and he's written that song for us. Wow, that's a lie. He didn't. You're confused. He didn't write that song for us. Sorry, I think it's like Hillsong or somebody better than us. I'm telling him to move his stuff because if you know me, you know why I work with youth is because I got problems with ADHD and hyperactivity. So I'm having to move because otherwise I'll run into something. Friends, I want to tell you that about a year and a half ago, I got to hear our principal of the Christian school, Mike James, give a message on how to kind of decipher a parable. And I so enjoyed what he did for us. He took this sort of a template of understanding a parable. He explained how to understand a parable, and then he took that tool and he went to a parable and showed us how to use it. And as I was studying for today's word, I stumbled into, you know how this is if you've ever done word studies or research in the word, and sometimes you'll study on resources that are just really helpful. And I stumbled into a resource that helped me understand a good way to study the book of James. And so if you'd like to read with me, we're going to be in James chapter 3. Feel free to turn there as well. And so what I want to do is I want to start first with prayer, and then I want to unpack for you kind of a way in which we can understand James, the author, and how he likes to write. And then I'm going to show you how I use this in James 3, a small segment of 5 verses, hopefully helping your study of God's Word while giving you an exhortation from that Word today as well. Father God, we don't come before you with anything that we have to offer of our own. It's yours. And dressed in your righteousness alone, we look for a day where we stand faultless before your throne because of what you've done. And because of what you've done, Holy Spirit, by regenerating, because what you do, Holy Spirit, is walk us into truth. We can attempt to enjoy discovering more about you and your ways through this passage today. Use me to build the body of Christ. And with this word, fall on hearts that are longing for intimacy with you, Father. In Jesus' name, amen. And so as I was doing a little bit of research on this book, James, and I discovered something very interesting to me. I had not ever heard this, and I love James. I've been reading this. I mean, my first passage, hanging on the placard of my high school graduation was James, 1 verses 2, consider it joy when you meet trials of every kind. And I thought, that's a dumb verse to have as your life verse. But the Lord has helped me make sure that I have experienced trials of many kinds. But He has proven faithful, and His joy is deeper than those troubles. And so I've known James, but I've never understood this little thing I want to share with you today. James had two primary influences, and once you hear this, it's going to pop off the page as you read of James. It won't surprise you that he's heavily influenced by the book of Proverbs, particularly chapters 1 through 9 of Proverbs. And so over and again, you see these nuggets of wisdom appearing in his writings. The second thing you notice is that as James, being the brother of Jesus, so many of the things that he says, you can just trace it. And if you have one of these fancy Bibles with a cross-reference in the center column, you can almost take it right back to usually Matthew. There's this root of Jesus' teaching that he now, late in his life of ministry, after spending years as the head of the Jerusalem church, is now sending out this letter to no specific church, but a general, they call it the diaspora, but a general grouping of churches, and no longer about basic doctrine, because we're 30 years into this thing called Christianity, this Christian experiment. And so he's speaking more to things where we get disconnected from the basic doctrines of Christ to where we live it out and where we get disconnected. So you see in James, roots of the teachings of Jesus with a heavy emphasis on what it looks like to do it. I don't know if you've probably caught that before when you've been in James, but for me, that was really helpful to understand why. So what that means for us is that his style is very fun. You can, if you are like me and you have a hard time focusing, you can go test it right now if you want. But almost all these little nuggets, there's like 10 or 12 of them in this book, start with either a question or like a thesis statement. They conclude with like a proverb. And then the center body is this tying those two things together with content and context. And so it's brilliant. I mean, today, our first, right off the bat, James 3:13. Who is wise and understanding among you? See, it's intended to grab the reader, get their minds focused on one particular thing so that as he unpacks it, unlike certain authors who will have themes that seem to tie every last nugget of truth together. I mean, James has that, but more specifically, he has these little passages that start with a grabber. I went to children's and family ministry with my major, and we had this like method for writing curriculum. It was called hook, book, look, took. And this hook was like grab them, have something right off the bat. That's why Nathan always stands right here, and he tells you a story about his personal life. He's hooking you. He's getting you in. And this is how we do it. James is just like that. Right off the bat, he's grabbing your attention with a question or a very focused thesis statement to grab a hold of you and get your mind thinking about what he's about to tell you next. So let's put this to work right now. As I've read this passage, I think that the thesis statement of this little section I'm going to read is that the truly wise person is a peacemaking person. I think that we're going to see here today, the truly wise person is a peacemaking person. Let's read the text today. James 3, verse 13. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, don't be boastful and be false to the truth. That's not wisdom that comes down from above. That's an earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then it's peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a concluding proverb for you. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. That's an interesting passage. He starts with this question to grab a hold of us and get us thinking in terms of, well, who is the one who's wise and understanding? And then he addresses a variety of things within that context, and he concludes with, in my opinion, a rather out-of-place proverb about righteousness being the harvest for the one who makes peace and sows peace. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's jump to that body first. So let's define wisdom. Let's see what James says about wisdom in this text. And we see, like any good author or many types of teaching, so often we get a description of what is, but we also are given a picture of what it isn't. It's to act as a comparative parallel. As we compare these two, we can begin to see, by understanding what it is and what it isn't, it should rise to the surface with piercing conviction in the reader, which is present in my life and in my heart. And so he goes about doing that by describing an earthly wisdom. On the screen you can see, right out of the text, and in verses 14 and on, if there's a bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in their heart, this is a boasting, and it's being false to the truth is a way of saying lying. There's a boasting and lying at the core. So it's motivated by selfish gain. Bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. As I got to thinking about this, I was thinking that, when we're motivated by selfish gain, there's something about that forces us to stare with obsession at our inner workings. And so we're so focused on whether it be our comfort, our pleasure, our pursuits. We become so kind of bogged into that way of thinking that selfishness what happens naturally, if you look at the progression, it turns outward. When I look outward at society from a place in my heart of deep selfish ambition, when I project that selfish ambition on you, what am I going to do? I'm going to become jealous. And what do I do when I become jealous? I'm going to become embittered. And so at the core of this earthly wisdom is a desire for selfish gain that manifests in a jealousy of the society around them. And what else does it say? It then, in that bedrock, becomes a birthplace for every kind of evil. He uses a word in verse 16, where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there's going to be disorder in every vile practice. Disorder is another word for division, or the breaking up of what should be or could be. As I read that passage dozens of times, just printing it in my mind, I began to notice something that I try to train our children upstairs when I do youth ministry stuff to notice. See, there's a passage we quote a lot, and it's just a helpful tool for us because it's so true. The thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus Christ has come to give us a life in abundance. And so when we look at the circumstances of our life, that so often cause us to ask questions like, why? Or where are you, God? I want to do something. I tell my students, I'm going to tell you as well. When you look at the evidence around you, what does it look like? Is it the fingerprint of a thief who steals, kills, and destroys? Or is it the evidence of a God whose love is so magnificent he sent Jesus to restore to you abundant life? I'm telling you, friends, at the heart of this earthly wisdom, you'll notice the evidences of the enemy's work. Therefore, it's earthly. Unspiritual, not in the sense that there isn't a spiritual reality. Unspiritual in the sense that it's juxtaposed against God's spirituality. It's an unspirituality. And therefore demonic. You know what it is? It's counterfeit wisdom. But James helps us by saying, but there is a heavenly, God-sent wisdom, an authentic wisdom. And you'll know what it looks like because the truly wise person will have a good conduct that is demonstrated in the presence of wisdom. Wisdom is good conduct displaying its presence. It's right doing. How do I know that? Well, it goes on to say, wisdom above is pure, peaceable, gentle. It's open. It loves wisdom, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. So we have this comparison. And again, I don't think he's just trying to make an intellectual point. I think that the implications of a comparison of this sort are directly targeted at the reader's heart. To act as a tool to understand what's present inside of the reader's heart. And you can see that all throughout the way that James writes. So here's my conclusion. As I kind of walk you through this, I think this is what James is saying. Here's what wisdom is. Because we need to define wisdom if we're going to understand this text. I think he says divine wisdom is this: knowing and doing the will of God. I think that this is how James defines wisdom, as knowing and doing the will of God. Hey, Brittany, can you bring me my water? Thanks. Sorry, call out. And we see this in Proverbs, right? If Proverbs has been highly influential to the author James, if Proverbs has been highly influential, then we have to understand that the author of Proverbs does something for us. So often, if you read Hebrews, he paints a picture of understanding the ways of God, of knowing the ways of God, and of doing the ways of God, or being wisdom, having wisdom. And in the author of Proverbs, there's a constant, there's this knowing, which is kind of the exposure in the beginning to think about it. There's the understanding, which takes a more comprehensive view. But wisdom is not knowing. Wisdom is not understanding. Wisdom is knowing, understanding, and then doing the ways of God. In fact, this is what faith is. Wisdom is faith manifest. Because when I take the ways of God and put it into practice into my life, I'm not claiming faith into it. I'm putting my faith into it. Does that make sense? That wisdom is faith. Because it doesn't take for granted that the truth that God gives, truth with a capital T, is to be understood in a vacuum. And if I hear truth and believe truth, it only makes sense that my faith in the God of that truth will be manifest through works, through doing. So, to conclude, I think James' definition of wisdom is knowing and doing the will of God. But this is where it gets interesting, because you might be like me at this point, because I'm going to be honest with you. When you're studying a scripture like this, man, there's just a lot of time in prayer. And being like, Lord, I'm not sure I understand this. And then I get to the end and I say, how on earth did we arrive at verse 18? And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. How do we get to there? How do we get to there from this passage? If your Bible's like mine, it has a heading that says wisdom from above. How do we get to this concluding verse? So let's examine the last verse for a second. Let's examine it. So, peacemaker, a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. You know, does that sound familiar? When I say peacemaker, what do you think of? You know what? Upstairs, people just answer. When I say peacemaker, what do you think of? There's 12 of them or something. Beatitudes. I love it. Thank you. The Beatitudes. It's an instantaneous, the readers would understand this, throwback to the Beatitudes, where Jesus is saying, blessed is the peacemaker. Now get this. Blessed is the peacemaker, for they'll be called sons of God. I think this is an interesting statement that Jesus makes, because he ties this trait, the person who participates in this endeavor to make peace, he ties to understanding so intricately the ways and the nature and character of God that the identity of being a son or daughter of God is on display when we step in and make peace. When we step in and make peace. So he's throwing this back, this concept of peacemaking, to Jesus, who highly esteemed the peacemaker, calling them blessed, calling them children of God. And so I want to make the connection then. What peacemaking is at its heart is this. Humanity, through Adam's and Eve's choice in the Garden of Sin, since that time, humanity has been in mutiny against God, been in rebellion against God. It's a war against not just the Creator, but also His ways. And so, what peacemaking does is it steps into that gap between a humanity that's at war with a good God who loves them, and peacemaking comes and brings an end to the mutiny, end to the sin and its consequences, by initiating peace through Jesus Christ. A peacemaker brings an end to the mutiny of humanity by initiating peace through Jesus Christ. If you're a note taker, that's a good one to write down. I'm going to write that one down, I think. I really think this is intrinsic to this passage, to understanding what peacemaking is. And I get at this point in this process of thinking, and I hope you're not drowning in my thoughts, because I am, and it's tough, but but I'm telling you, that would we ever dare to be so